Hello, I'm Betty Pomeroy, Chair of the Washington County Aging and Veteran Service Advisory Council. Welcome to the 2004 Legislative Candidates Forum for Western Washington County. Our legislative priority: fulfill our promise, do our duty to those who have made extraordinary sacrifices, who have worked hard, and who need our protection. Washington County has 2 appointed advisory councils that advise the Board of Commissioners in the Department of Disability, Aging, and Veteran Services. The advisory councils study of the issues facing our county residents lead them to believe that citizens want a strong community where they can prosper and be independent. We have a moral obligation as citizens to invest in such a community, and the loss of public investments in our community diminishes each person's and the county's economic vitality. This compromises our quality of life and independence, our American dream. The councils and many residents have participated in numerous discussions about what our investments need to be made in the community's infrastructure. Citizens are seeing erosion in our quality of life and local economy. Vision West and other citizen discussions identified a need for the community to invest in itself and our mutual benefit. Citizens state that to maximize independence and build a vibrant economy, it is clear that the public infrastructures are vital, including good road and transportation, high-quality education, housing that meets the needs of our citizens, and services that protect them. In fact, the department links public investments to local businesses for goods and services, resulting in jobs for thousands of local residents. When reductions were made in the Oregon Health Plan, for an example, Washington County businesses and health care providers lost about $31.9 million in revenue. Thus, the advisory councils want the voters of Washington County to hear from legislative candidates how they seek to build a strong community and local economy. Our focus will be on the connection between this strong community and the economy and the issues of the county's veterans, people with disabilities, and elderly residents. 4 major areas have been prioritized for consideration. These include building an infrastructure to reduce lost time for thousands of working families who are caring for elders and to restore critical services, to protect our elders and people with disabilities from harm and neglect, and to rebuild physical and mental health resources for those unable to work, reducing their costs to us, to increase the economic independence of veterans and their widows, and finally, to build housing, community infrastructure, and jobs that support a mobility impaired and aging society. We are pleased to have Dr. Elizabeth Kutza, professor at Portland State University's Institute of Aging, as moderator for the 2004 Legislative Candidates Forum. She will introduce the forum rules and handle the questions that will follow. Thank you.
And thank you, Betty. And thank all of you for taking time out of your busy campaign schedule to come and address these serious issues dealing with veterans, the elderly, and the disabled. Now a bit about the forum rules. All of you are seated according to your legislative district. The forum is organized around issues, as we said, that are facing seniors, veterans, and people with disability. Each of you will be given a minute to answer an introductory question. Then the forum issues will be presented. I will introduce a presenter, a member of the Advisory Council, who will give you a synopsis of the issue. Following that synopsis, I'll pose a set of questions. There are 4 major issue areas, each with 2 or more questions. Each of you from a given district will be asked a different question. Each candidate will be given 1 minute to respond to your question. In recognition of the fact that the legislators from our county will be working as a delegation on issues, I will offer other candidates the opportunity to add comments to those made by the district candidates. Each other candidate will have 30 seconds to make additional remarks. At the end of the forum, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to summarize his or her position on the issues in the forum. Now I'd like to introduce our timekeeper. As we said, we're going to keep you on a tight leash today with a minute, 30 seconds, 2 minutes. And in order to help us do that, we've asked Doreen Stenson, a member of the Aging and Veterans Advisory Council, to be our timekeeper today. She's seated in front of you and will operate the timer. The timer is clearly visible to you, and I would really ask you to respect those time limits. As we begin, I would like to ask each of the 2004 legislative candidates here at the forum to talk to us a bit about their experience with people who are elderly or who have significant disabilities or who have served in the military. We will begin with candidates from House District 26. Once the candidates from House District 26 respond, we'll move on to the other districts, 29, 30, 32. Unfortunately, we do not have any representative from House District 33 with us this morning. So I will, beginning at the far end of the table there, I will ask you to first introduce yourself and then to answer the following question. Do you have an immediate family member, aunt, grandmother, uncle, grandfather, in-law, who has a significant disability, who is 75 years or older, or who has served in the military? And what have you learned from them? If they have needed assistance in any way, have you stepped in to help them? So I'd like to ask first Representative Kitts to make a response.
Oh, okay. I thought you said House District 26. I'm sorry.
Well, on this, since we'll just go around for introductions here.
That's perfectly fine. I love the trapping of the question of you wanting me to call my grandmother, my aunt, or my uncle elderly. So, and it's being televised, so I think they'd have issues with that. But I'll tell you, yeah, I have. It's been a very, in fact, we just had the passing of my great aunt, who was here in a local mental health institution in Hillsborough, suffering from Alzheimer's, and has for many, many years. And it was a traumatic experience, not just for the individual, but the individual's family. It was, my aunt and uncle were directly housing her until they had to put her in the facility, and it was the hardest decision they ever had to make, and it was a financial burden on the family, upwards of $4,000 and $5,000 a month when you figure in housing cost and medical cost. Fortunately, my family was in a position they could afford that, but not all people are like that. So that's that. All 4 of my grandparents are still living. They're all in their 70s. So I understand and hear on a regular basis from my grandparents, the rising cost of medical care and prescription drugs. And so I think I have a direct pipeline to that generation that I'm very fortunate to have and take with me into the legislature when I'm making those decisions as your state representative. So with that being said, I see the timer is not working. I don't know if I've been over a minute or not, but...
Not these. Oh, so
we only got 30 minutes. I can talk about myself all day.
Yeah, I know. I think we need some limits here.
I'll wind that up with to say, yes, I've had family that served in the military. Yes, I have family who is in the 70 years category there. And yes, I've dealt with mental illness to some degree. So.
Great. Thank you, Representative.
The first question, yes.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Sorry, my name is Scott Summerall, Constitution Party candidate for District 30. I have a grandmother in Wisconsin who is mostly blind and has some other issues, cancerous issues, and I visited her earlier this year. So yes, significant disability there. My aunt, also in Wisconsin, has mental illness. And my grandfather is a World War II veteran. He was shot in the head by a teenager from the German Army. He survived it, and he had mental illness as well, and he eventually died of cancer. So he passed away a few years ago. And another aunt of mine has diabetes. So there's some illness in my family. 75 years or older. My grandmother just passed away recently. She was post-75, so no one that's living right now in my family older than 75, except the one grandmother in Wisconsin, which I mentioned, and then military service. I already mentioned my grandfather, who served in World War II. What did I learn from them? I learned a lot from my grandfather. I think first and foremost, he's probably the man that I've maybe most respected in my life. I think I learned that the family really needs to take first responsibility in taking care of their own, and my grandmother did a great job of that, and I would hope to do the same, and my mother as well, me to a lesser extent. And if they need assistance, what ways did you help them? Visits, I think, was the best thing that could be done, either flying from Northern California or Oregon. Visiting them, I think, was the most important thing the family could do, is show their love.
Thank you, Scott.
My name is Mick Sander. I'm a candidate, Democratic candidate for House District 30. My father was born in 1923 and served in World War II, and he unfortunately passed away in 1999, but in the years leading up to his passing, I was responsible for his caretaking. And he chose to die at home where he didn't want to go to an institution, so he moved in with my sister here, and the family collectively kind of took care of him up until the end. So he was both over 75 when he passed away and served honorably in World War II. My grandmother currently is over 75 and lives in southeast Portland. And she is a widow and is getting to the point where it's difficult for her to take care of her own household. So I have experience there, going over and sitting with her and talking with her and bringing my kids over there so she can see the grandchildren. You know, if weeds need to get pulled or shopping needs to get done, my wife and I happily go over there and do it. So that's my experience with taking care of the elderly and veterans in my family.
Thank you. Senator Crummell.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is State Representative Jerry Crummell, House District 26. First, I'd like to thank the County Aging and Disability Services Department for putting this on through the use of volunteers such as yourself, Dr. Guzman. My mother is in a facility currently in Wilsonville. We moved her in there a little over a year ago. She became significantly more disabled in 2000 after having a heart attack and almost dying on us. We moved her down here so that she could actually be closer to much better medical care than what she was getting at the time in Yakima, Washington. And I've often said that she survived in spite of the medical system up there. And that also because she is a veteran and she has rights at the Veterans Hospital and has been treated there on many different occasions. And actually when we first moved her to the Portland-Vancouver area, she was in the Veterans Administration nursing facility in Vancouver. She is significantly disabled now, as I mentioned. She's way over the age of 75, although she doesn't think she is. She still thinks she's in her 70s. And both of my parents were military veterans. My mother, of course, was in the Army Nurses Corps, and my father was a pilot in the Army Air Corps. I also have a brother who is a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Air Force. I had another brother who died when he was 29, and he was significantly disabled after a bicycle accident, and in which he almost died from a severe head injury. What I learned from my parents is a work ethic, a respect, an honesty, and integrity, and to exhibit that at all times, and always remember that everyone is always watching. So don't do things when people aren't watching, because they are. And what I've done to assist them, and I still assist my mother, is everything that I possibly could. I made sure that my brother was taken care of, and in the last couple of years of his life, when he was becoming quite a drain on my mother, I assisted the family in making sure, working through the medical system in Yakima, Washington, to move him into a group home where he was actually much better off and much safer, and provided my mother with quite a bit of mental relief as well as physical relief. I often had said that he would kill her if we didn't get him moved out of her home, and it wasn't because he would do anything to harm her. It was that he would do something to harm himself because he had seizures and that sort of thing. And so, and currently I still assist my mother while she's in the nursing home, and they provide the care that she needs. I am available 24 hours a day to go over and do anything that is needed. I make sure that whenever she's transferred to a hospital or taken anywhere, I go with her, and I assist her in any other way that I can.
Thank you. Mr. Olson.
Good morning. My name is Doug Olson. I'm a candidate for House District 32, which includes western Washington County, a bit of Columbia County, and all of Tillamook County, and most of Clatsop County. So geographically, it's quite large. I have had some experience with people who are disabled. I was raised in part by my grandparents. My father died at age 4 when I was 4. He suffered some service disabilities from World War II. My mother died when I was age 11, and she suffered also from asthma and emphysema and required fairly extensive care for the last year or so. So from age 11, I've sort of been on my own. I lived with my grandparents for about 3 or 4 years, and my grandmother was disabled. She was in a wheelchair and required finally movement to a care facility, as did my grandfather. So from that point on, I was kind of independent. In fact, I was very independent. Some years later, I had a father-in-law who suffered from a variety of illnesses, including extreme alcoholism. He lived with us for a period of 1.5 years, and it was an ordeal on the family as well as I'm sure on him, and he passed away at a rather early age. What I've learned from this experience is, first of all, sooner or later we all need help. And the help often requires money. It requires some assistance from the government. And the way that our American society is set up today, we're not the Waltons. Frequently, the family is scattered all over America, and it's difficult to call on the family for services, so we do look to other resources. As far as other things I learned is independence. It's very, very difficult for people who have disabilities or who are just getting on in years to give up their independence. And I'm not looking forward to 30 or 40 years when that may happen to me if I live that long. So I have learned those things, and I think the system that we have is very good, but it certainly could stand some improvement. And I think perhaps all of us have a story to relate about someone who suffered from some sort of disability.
Thank you very much. Representative Gallegos.
I'm Mary Gallegos, the state representative in House District 29, which is Forest Grove, Cornelius, and Hillsborough. Just last weekend, I took my mother down to Salem for the dedication of the Veterans Medal of Honor Memorial. That was an important event for us. Growing up as a child, we always knew the significance and importance of those who had served our country, and I took my mother to make sure that she could be there as her great uncle was honored, who had received this Medal of Honor, and she was reflecting on how important that lesson was in her life because she had to grow up in her uncle's home during the Depression. And what saved them was his important veterans benefits and the extra stipend he had received because of these medals. Very humble man, not willing to really talk about that, but knew that the stipends from the Veterans Department were so important. She also reflected upon my childhood. I was 14 when my father died. He was a veteran from World War II. And the difficult struggles that I know that we went through as children as my mother tried to figure out and navigate that structure of how you receive Social Security, how you can access the benefits that are available to you if you're a widow or a widower and have children, the important benefits that were there for me and my brothers and sisters when we started into college. They were significant, and it was a difficult struggle for us as children trying to understand what type of complex system was there and why wasn't it so easy to navigate. And now, of course, she's aging, and we're taking care of her. She's needs additional help, like any parent does. We have to help her mitigate her doctor's appointments and juggling the important aspects of her health care. The drug prescriptions, interactions, and all those things that typically, as children, she navigated those for us, and we're navigating those for her, as she also has to deal with 2 grown children who have significant disabilities, and my siblings who have one struck with multiple sclerosis and one with Crohn's disease. They're both devastating. They both progressed significantly over the years. And it's up to the rest of us and our family to make sure we're there to help mitigate. We've worked on making sure that there's accessibility facilities for them and that their home is taken care of. And sometimes it's financial support. There's any variety of things that you're called to do at any moment to care for those who have a need at the last minute. And those are the perspective that I've always had as I serve and represent this district in Salem, is that there are people in need. They need help, they need assistance in navigating this system, and they need the support of those of us in Salem. So thanks for having this forum today.
Mr. Cox.
My name's Tom Cox. I'm the Libertarian candidate for House District 29. That's the western part of Hillsborough, as well as Cornelius and Forest Grove. I'm really glad you asked this question of us, because what this does is it puts more of a human face on things. It's a real shame when we hear about people who aren't directly tied into the aging community or the veterans community or the disabled community talk about the problems as if you're faceless, as if you're not somebody's mother or brother or sister or husband or wife. And so let me just tell you that I've got all 4 of my grandparents have passed. My mother is dead, and my father is over 70. Well, he's turning 75 in 3 days. I've got 2 close family members who are disabled, one of whom is in really bad shape. And we've got 2 veterans in the family. But it's more than just my personal story. It's also how I've learned about looking past those things to have the human connection with folks who need help, and to make sure that we value the person as a whole person. When my grandmother was finally put into a nursing home at age 99, she lived in a second-floor walk-up until she herself decided, you know, these stairs are a little too hard now that I'm 99. It's time for me to go next door to the home. And she was very active, and she took care of her neighbors. She taught elementary school, and she found herself in her 90s caring for 70-year-olds who had been her students in that small town. And what she taught me was to value the contributions that the elderly and the disabled and our veterans can make, and not just insist that they be passive recipients of government largesse, but that we tie them into our communities and we value their contributions. And that is a perspective we have got to take to Salem, that if all we do is talk about spending, and use the dollars as a proxy for how much we care, and we don't look at the actual content of these programs and see which ones help and which ones don't and how much they help, then we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we're hurting our communities.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Riley.
I'm Chuck Riley, and I too am candidate for House District 29. I have a father who's 93 years old, and he actually is a cancer survivor and recently was in a care facility with a broken hip. So, you know, we've been fortunate that he's been around as long as he has and is doing as well as he is. And you know, we do have to help him out. I also have a mother-in-law who's 93. She lives by herself over in Milwaukee, and she has neighbors and family, like my wife and I, who stop in and make sure that she can go to the grocery store. She's fighting with eyesight problems and you know, wants to stay independent. Her husband died a few years ago, and she's living on her own. But she's lucky. She has good health. She actually plays golf once a week at 94, which is incredible. And I think you know, we do have to, you know, make sure that we treat our seniors with respect, and we do value their service, and their contributions to society, but we also must be sure that those who can't take care of themselves are taken care of. And veterans, I had 3 uncles who were in the Army Air Corps. I was in the Air Force, and my son is in the Air Force. So we have veterans in our family as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you, all of you, for these personal reflections. What it clearly indicates is something that we read about in the newspaper, but we often don't personalize in this way, that we're living in revolutionary times. This is the first generation that really has to concern themselves with parent-caring issues, with issues of people living to 90, living to 100, with the incapacities, the infirmities that may accompany that. So we are in a time where the solutions that we look to, the strategies that we have, need to be creative. Obviously, families continue to be involved, as witness your experiences, but there is certainly a role for that public sector. And so today we'll be focusing on some of these issues and asking you about your thoughts of how we can better respond to some of these needs. The first issue will be presented to us by Dr. David Nardone of the Aging and Veterans Advisory Council. Dr. Nardone will introduce the issue facing working families.
Shall we?
Please.
The proportion of elderly in the total population is now substantial at 13%. The number of elderly and the rate of aging are expected to increase rapidly in the near future. The number of those severely and moderately disabled will more than triple over the next 2 decades. Among those included in the severely disabled category are those with clinically diagnosed Alzheimer's disease. This implies a vast increase in the numbers of families challenged to give special services of health, housing, and nutrition and aid to their loved ones. Absences due to elder care are estimated to cost employers about $3,000 per employee per year. In 2003 alone, thousands of seniors and people with disabilities lost vital long-term care services, levels 14 to 17, as well as benefits from the Oregon Health Plan, prescription drugs, medically needy, and Oregon Project Independence services. Families clearly need these services. $45.2 million goes to local care facilities and small businesses, and 680 professional caregivers each year for our 2,200 aged or disabled residents who need care. $44 million each year goes to local and regional health care providers for services through the Oregon Health Plan for the 6,500 aged or disabled residents. And $31.9 million was lost to the county's economy, and 4,923 county residents lost medical care due to cuts in the Oregon Health Care Plan alone. Nearly 78% of those currently unsafe and unprotected are either blind or disabled.
Thank you very much. You have heard now from Dr. Nardone that many hardworking adults are supporting both children and their elderly, or a family member with a significant disability. Yet medical care is often unavailable and unaffordable if you're unable to work or due to illness or age. Many workers are bankrupted by major illnesses. We're going to begin our questioning with District 26. And while there are 3 people running in this district, including Rick Ross and Charles Radley, the only person who was able to fit it into the schedule this morning is the representative from that district, Jerry Crummell. So Representative Crummell, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. First, how do you see those families balancing the need to work with the need to keep their elder and disabled family members safe? What are likely imbalances in the family that you might reflect on?
These are very interesting questions. I think, if I may answer the second one first.
All right.
Some of the likely imbalances, I think, in the family are when, especially when people that are working have disabled children as well as elder family members that they're trying to take care of. It's not easy, obviously, for that to occur, and I think that where we as a state can be helpful, we should be helping with provide home care, as an example, when people are able to stay in the home. When people, one of the things that was mentioned was Oregon Project Independence. I will point out that our previous governor absolutely hated, for some reason, Oregon Project Independence, and it was every year was on his cut list. I would also point out that it was the legislature that saved the Oregon Project Independence every time we were able to. So I think that the families balancing the need to work and the care is going to be determined by the ability to get care in the home for when they are at work, but also for employers to be able to give them time off as they need to, even if it's unpaid time off, to go and attend to the needs of the elderly at home.
Thank you. Now the second question, and again, I will remind all of you that we are now on the clock, so if you would pay attention to the timekeeping. The second question is, how do you see the cuts in the Oregon Health Plan as affecting these families? What would you do to relieve those who are in a position of choosing between, for example, which drug to take and when to pay the rent?
I think one of the problems with the Oregon Health Plan is that the money that's been going to the Oregon Health Plan from the state has been feeding the bureaucracy instead of getting on the ground and getting to the recipients of the people that need the care. But the one thing that I think that we really have got to do, and I am prepared to introduce this in the next legislative session, is a health savings account type of concept utilized for the Oregon Health Plan. I think by doing that, we can actually increase reimbursements to providers, and we will also speed the time at which they are able to get reimbursed. Consequently, it will bring providers back, and that's going to increase access to health care for a lot of folks. The other thing is that by increasing reimbursements to the providers, what we will do is we will start eating away at because of the cost shifting that currently occurs in our healthcare system, we will start eating away at the healthcare inflationary rate, and that's how we're going to start being able to control healthcare costs.
Okay. Now under our format, I would like to invite any other candidate sitting at the table here to respond either to the questions that I presented to Representative Crummell, or you even have two possible other questions you can answer. You can select one. One question has to do with the average annual employee contribution for family health insurance coverage in Oregon has nearly doubled between 1993 and 2001, rising from $1,043 to $1,925. What legislative solutions might you propose? Or two, what do you see as the effects of this challenge on local employers, businesses, or the local economy? What steps would you suggest business take to assist the employees with elder care issues? Now, anyone who wants to respond has 30 seconds. Mr. Riley.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the insurance issue. One of the things that I would introduce in Salem is a plan to be sure that any rates increases by the insurance companies have to be approved by the Insurance Commission after lengthy public hearings to make sure that they're justified. I think that's a very important step.
Yes, Mr. Cox.
I think Representative Crummell has hit the nail on the head when he mentions healthcare savings accounts, and I think he may actually be underselling them a little bit. Their potential to cut costs, not cut price, not cut the funding, which was so callously done in the last session. Funding for some of the most disabled people, most vulnerable people, was put secondary to and conditional on a tax increase. But rather, we need to change the structure of the system, and reforming the Oregon Health Plan to make it more affordable is exactly the right way to go.
What else? Yes, Mr. Sander.
While I agree with most of the comments that were just made, I want to say that though money may be being lost to bureaucratic red tape and things like that, we cannot just stop, cut the funding, and lose these people from the Oregon Health Plan. That is not the right reaction to do. And I think we need to look closer and find out better ways to cut through that red tape and improve where the money goes instead of just pulling back hard on the reins and causing so many people to suffer.
Okay. Representative Kids.
I would point out, and I hate to echo the sentiments of everything that's been said before, Project Oregon Independence would not be here today if it weren't for three of the people that are sitting up here, and that's Representative Crummell, Representative Gallegos, and myself, who stared down the governor, the leadership in both the House and the Senate, and said, no, we'll stay here till December of 2004 if we have to, and make it truly the longest session in Oregon history if you make these cuts. We didn't allow them to happen, so I think we can stand with pride and say that we did do that. I got 3 seconds, so never mind. Tough to solve the world's problem in 30 seconds.
Yes, that's it, Mr. Olson.
My remarks will be very brief as well. I agree with what's been said, and I believe strongly there's a moral component to government, and it manifests itself in how we treat those who need these sorts of services. Second of all, there's much made from time to time about those who are uninsured, as many as 40 or 43 million in America, and I would like to differentiate or just call attention to the fact that when they're uninsured doesn't necessarily mean they do without medical care. Certainly some of those have it at maybe a rather minor level, but it is there. And finally, I, being a small business person, would like to see the state and perhaps federal government do something about interstate insurance packs and the ability to cross state lines and have cooperative agreements that might make it more affordable for those of us in small businesses.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Cinero.
I would remove federal restraints on health care. In fact, I would totally reform the health care system, make it controlled within the state. I would propose a catastrophic insurance that the state would offer to everybody regardless of employment, about a $3,000 deductible, and then go back to the system we used to have for years in this country was you pay cash for all your standard services, prescription drugs, and non-catastrophic coverage. That would give incentive to hospitals to keep their costs down as well as to increase their quality. We don't have that anymore. And that right has been taken from the states, and the HMO Act in 1973 introduced blue tape and bureaucracy to the system, which increases costs as well, which needs to be removed.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Now we go on to issue number 2. The presenter of this issue is Gail Miller, Assistant Chair of the Aging and Veterans Services Advisory Council. Ms. Miller will introduce the issues surrounding keeping people safe in our community. Ms. Miller.
Thank you. Untreated mental health is way too expensive. Untreated mood, cognitive disorders, and dementia mark the mental health status of many older adults. Oregon's suicide rate is 9th highest of all states, and men over the age of 75 have the highest suicide rate of all age groups. Physical and mental health care for those unable to work. There are 4,923 county residents now without the Oregon Health Plan. Mental health treatment is rationed, so few get it. Untreated mental health disorders are too expensive. Many older adults go untreated, and Oregon's suicide rate is 9th highest in the United States. Men age 75 plus have the highest suicide rate of all age groups. Help Oregon families work. Thousands of county families impacted by Alzheimer's disease, depression, and chemical dependencies, yet community infrastructure to assist families is in tatters. Adult protective services and survival or economic recovery rates are poor for abused and/or neglected elders. An estimated 6,000 of our residents, either elderly or living with disabilities, are abused each year. Yet Oregon only funds 57 full-time protective staff statewide. Protecting our people. Abused and/or neglected elders rarely recover. 6,000 of our elderly disabled residents are abused each year, and only 57 full-time adult protective service staff statewide to protect these vulnerable citizens. That is 57 for 354,830 people with disabilities in the age range of 21 to 64. and 438 177 people ages 65 or older. We have a duty to protect these citizens by updating laws to be on a par with child abuse laws, to increase our adult protective service staffing, and to add a 24/7 statewide report line and staffing. Statewide public awareness campaign would also be another measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. As Ms. Miller points out, one of the unhappy side effects of an increasingly older population and a population of disabled persons who are now surviving longer thanks to medical interventions is what we see are they become easy targets of unscrupulous behavior. Unfortunately, about half of the time, those unscrupulous people are members of the family. Many times, self-neglect shortens lives and wastes personal resources. So concern is both on the abuse side, whether it's financial, emotional, physical, and on the self-neglect side. Again, as much as older people want to retain their independence, sometimes it's at a cost in terms of their own self-care. The first question to be asked here will be directed to the representative from House District 32. The incumbent, Deborah Boone, and the Constitution candidate, Ben Snodgrass, are not available with us today, but we do have Mr. Douglas Olson. So the question goes to you, sir. How do you see abuse as an important moral issue in our county? What legislative strategies and investments would you suggest to keep people safe?
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, I believe strongly there is a moral component to government, and it begins with adequate funding, and then maybe even prior to that, recognition of what the problems in the situation is. I do understand that there's abuse at all levels, and as you correctly pointed out, my understanding is that a good share of that comes from the family, and that's quite unfortunate, and I certainly don't have a solution to the social problems of that magnitude. However, what the state can do about it, I think, is first of all make people aware, second of all provide a mechanism where they can seek help and receive help and have the help be meaningful in terms of turning it over to the system, including the prosecuting attorneys. As far as what strategies would move forward to keep our people safe, I guess the answer is what I just said. I think the state must first recognize the problem, and then they must look at it not only in a social perspective, but maybe a business perspective, that certain things done early with a rather modest investment yield dividends down the line, that it doesn't fester and become a much larger problem that requires more resources and has an even more dreadful downside for the individual. So it seems to me that the first thing you do is recognize it, then you do something about it, and the only parentheses I guess I'd put around all of this is there are limited resources, and all of us at this table must deal with the fiscal realities of Oregon.
Okay, once again, I'll remind people about the timekeeping and their responses. The second question I would like to ask you has to reflect on the data that was presented around mental illness, depression, mental health services. Where do you think people with both physical and mental health, without physical and mental health care insurance, can go for treatment, for medication? Are there legislative solutions that you might think about in terms of responding to these gaps in our mental health treatment?
I think the first thing, again, is going back and recognizing that the problem is there. Mental health, in my opinion, and I claim no major expertise in that subject, of course, is mental health, in my judgment, should be considered at a level par with physical health and disabilities as well, because it truly affects one's outlook on life and how you get through society. Again, I guess I'd go back to the original statement that once we realize it's there, then the legislature attempts to fund it the best we can. And mental health should no longer be pushed in the background and something to be dealt with when and if we can get to it. I think it needs to be part of the treatment to the extent we can provide it right up front.
Thank you. Once again, I'd like to invite candidates from the other districts to add briefly to the remarks of Mr. Olson and to answer within a 30-second time frame. So let's start with Representative Kidd.
Yeah, I would add that the legislature in 2003 did increase the penalties for elderly care abuse. And so what I'd like to see from those that are directly involved in the implementation of those stricter penalties to find out back if those penalties are in fact working before we try to, continue to address a problem without letting the solutions that we've already put forward catch up. And to revert very quickly in 7 seconds back to the previous question, we need to look at bulk purchasing options for drugs for drug companies here, and also R&D tax credits for the drug companies that make those to provide the incentive for them.
Yes.
I think one thing that needs to be done without question is to increase the number of people who are out there taking a look at these problems. You said there's 57 for almost 800,000 people in Oregon, and that's pretty disgraceful in my opinion. There's no way that 57 people can check in on everybody, on all 800,000. And even with 100 people, you probably couldn't do it, but you'd have that many more people on the streets making sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen. So.
Mr. Cox.
One of the things that I'm a management consultant by trade, and so what I do is I look for the best ways things are done around the world and try and figure out how to take those best practices and bring them into the local environment and make them work. This is not an environment with the sixth highest spending state government in the country where spending more money is going to go over with the voters, and I don't think it's going to work that way. But there are some terrific examples that I can't give you in 6 seconds of ways in which we can use 57 people as force multipliers to vastly increase our coverage and vastly improve the oversight that we can give.
Well, would be interested to see how that could happen. Representative Gallegos.
Yeah, it's important, and I was going to just echo what Representative Kitt said. We did look at addressing and increasing some of the penalties against elder abuse. We know that many of the folks who are being abused, some of those who are suffering mental illness, they're showing up in our jails, and that's costing us. We need to figure out how we can effectively treat those who have issues where they can actually get better instead of seeing them file through our system, because it is costing us at both ends of the spectrum. We just need to fix it in the right place.
Mr. Riley.
Yeah, I wanted to address the abuse issue. I agree, we did increase penalties, and I think that we have to be sure that those are enforced. I think we should make elder abuse equal in this state to child abuse. I believe that we really need to look out for our folks. Number two, we need to make sure that those folks who turn in abusers in elder facilities are protected and they're not persecuted.
Okay.
Yeah, I would also support kind of seeing how those legislative effects go and the stricter penalties on people who do abuse others. I think another thing that needs to be mentioned by leaders of government too is that our country ultimately has a moral obligation. Each person has to realize that their own moral choices will affect everybody else. An immoral society will eventually self-destruct because the costs to everybody else will far outweigh everything else. So I think it's important for leaders of this country to say each person has a moral responsibility that we can't legislate. So pay attention to how you behave. It's an important message.
Thank you all very much. We're now ready to move on to the third issue. And the presenter here will be Betty Pomeroy, who you met earlier. She's chair of the Aging and Veterans Advisory Council, and her presentation is on the issues facing veterans.
Thank you, Dr. Kutza. As a side, I am a veteran, so let us strive to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, Abraham Lincoln. Barriers to the VA benefits shortchange Oregon and its citizens. Over 370,300 veterans are alive today. 4,000 new veterans or more are due from the Iraqi war. Plus thousands more widows, widowers of veterans. We read in the paper daily the numbers of World War II veterans that are leaving this earth. Barriers shortchange citizens. All of these veterans yet, only 2,700 new VA claims in the state of Oregon in 2003. Why? Veterans and widows, and especially widows and widowers, don't know about what they can and cannot get in VA benefits. If equal access statewide to claims assistance offered, bring in the money. Comparable states of our population get $33 million to $258 million more per year than we do here in Oregon. Washington County alone has 40,546 veterans. The Department of Aging and Veteran Services linkage to the 1,775 of them brings us 21,500 million per year to our local economy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cooper.
So we've heard that our county has 40,000 veterans and untold numbers of widows of veterans. Assisting veterans and their widows to gain access to Veterans Administration benefits promises to bring to our local economy about $12,000+ per veteran. We will now ask the candidates in House District 29 to respond to the following three questions, one apiece, and we do have representation of all three of the candidates from the district. So let's begin with Representative Gallegos. Why do so few of our county's veterans and widows receive their benefits? And what legislative solutions do you see that could address this?
Thank you. This last session, I was co-sponsor of a bill, the Veterans Pilot Project. It's previously had been done as a budget note, trying to make sure that we could go out and target our veterans, find out where they're at, where are they receiving their aid, and get them on the veterans benefits. One of the biggest problems we have is that we don't fully fund our county veteran service officers who have the job of going out and finding these folks and helping them get on the benefit packages that are there that they've earned. The unfortunate calamity is that when they receive Medicaid, they have to pay that back, or their families or their estate will have to pay that back, and it can devastate them. Also, as co-chair of the Information Technology Committee just 2 weeks ago, we had and invited many folks to come and present the PARA software. It's free software that the federal government provides to us to allow us to track and identify folks who are receiving other benefits so we could match and locate these veterans and get them the benefits that they need, the services that they deserve, that will save them and their families money. It's better money, and it comes from the federal government. They don't have to pay it back, and it also will free up space and allow us to use some of our Medicaid dollars elsewhere for other needy Oregonians.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cox, you say you're a management consultant.
Yes, ma'am.
And you work in business. What is the benefit or cost to our local economy do you see as far as federal benefits for veterans?
Well, I think even before we get into the dollars, we have to acknowledge the profound moral debt that we owe to veterans, that we have a compact as a society with people when we say, go forth and fight our battles and maintain our freedoms for ourselves and for our posterity, and we'll be here for you if you do that. That's a promise. And then when they come back from the wars, are we in fact maintaining our promise? And what does that say about us as a society? What does it say as us about legislators or potential legislators when we don't keep our promises? That is so important. Now, with a nod in that direction, clearly every taxpayer in Oregon is paying federal taxes. So we're paying our share. Everybody in the state is paying into the federal system our burden of debt to the veterans. And when our veterans don't receive that benefit, we are all shortchanged. That is an unacceptable state of affairs.
Thank you. Mr. Riley, the war in Iraq is adding thousands of new veterans to Oregon. What challenges will these returning veterans face, and how can Oregon fulfill their promise to them?
It's true. We have lots of returning veterans, and many of those are National Guard. These folks have been called up and are doing their duty and are returning. They're going to have many problems. In fact, we, as a state, do provide some retirement, some benefits for those folks, But in the last session, Representative Gallegos voted to cut those benefits from approximately 1.4 million down to about 89,000, cut of over 80%. I would not support that. I believe that our returning servicemen deserve better than that, and I believe that we can do better.
Okay. I now invite the candidates from other districts to briefly make remarks around this particular issue. Representative Crummell.
Thank you very much. I want to agree with Representative Gallegos with regards to our county Veteran Services officers. We need to keep them on board. They provide a very much-needed service to our veterans in terms of advising them and helping them work through the maze that's needed. The other thing that we need to do is work with that's not been mentioned yet, and that is to work with our congressional delegation to keep Veteran Services offered throughout the states. And that includes working with them to keep Walla Walla open, for example, which is slated to be closed in the next 3 years. Because people in Pendleton, Umatilla, LeGrand, and northeastern Oregon rely heavily on that system. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Kitts.
First of all, I'd like to thank Betty for your service and those 40,000 other veterans here in the state for their service to our great state and country. I would disagree with Chuck's numbers, and I hate to point fingers in 30 seconds, but I would hate to disagree with Chuck's numbers from the 1.4 to the 89,000. I would say that I've worked at the federal level in the U.S. Congress on TRICARE, and as far as I'm concerned, the TRICARE system that provides these health coverages for our benefits is broken. I don't know why we need a federal system when we can have a state system. I think Oregonians know better how to take care of Oregonians. I'd like to see that money get back to our states where we, our local officials, our county administrators, our city council, can administer these funds more directly to our veterans, as opposed to having these veterans have to go through various chains of bureaucracy to get those benefits that are entitled to them. And I think that we at the state can do that. And we have a very ineffective congressional delegation, which is why we don't get the federal funds that we have. And I would challenge them to be here and debate that issue.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Sander.
Well, I want to agree real quickly with something that Mr. Crummell just said about the veteran service officers. We need to increase those so that they can help people understand the paperwork to fill out. And I want to disagree with Representative Kitts a little bit here about TRICARE. TRICARE is a beautiful system that works fantastically. My son is on TRICARE, and we've never had a problem with anything. Very little or no out-of-pocket cost. Everything has been great and expedient, so I think it's a fine system.
Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Olson.
I would just very briefly say that I also second those who've called for more funding of our Veteran Services officers. I worked for a period of time here in Washington County, and the person who held it at that time was, in my judgment, a stellar person in this community who brought a lot of people services that they might not otherwise have had. In Tillamook County, my home, we have one officer who serves about 4,200 veterans, and I don't know how one person can stay in any kind of reasonable contact with 4,200 people. I don't think it can be done.
And I believe people with disabilities, widows of veterans, it needs to be made a priority. I think it is. I mean, after infrastructure, I would say helping the needy, the helpless has to be a priority for everybody. I would also say that the states need to start standing up and telling Congress to stop sending our troops over to fight wars that aren't ours. And we got to look at the supply situation here. We have to stop being the United Nations global police. We need to, the states need to start speaking up about sending our troops over to serve corporate interests, and start looking at the other end. Why do we have so many veterans, so many disabled veterans, and start addressing the real supply issue there,
Thank you very much.
Causing the demand.
All right. Moving on to issue number 4. The presenter for issue number 4 is Matt Roloff of the Accessibility and Disability Services Advisory Council. Mr. Roloff will introduce the issue of housing and jobs.
Yeah, hi, my name is Matt Roloff, and I'm the immediate past president of Little People of America, and I currently represent that organization in the 5 northwestern states. I'm also raising my family of 4 here in Washington County. I'm a small business owner, and I also own and operate a small farm here in Washington County. I'm going to talk about community infrastructure and jobs. What we do for ourselves dies with us. What we do for others and the world remains and is immortal. Albert Pine, English author. Building community. Stairs and narrow hallways lead to costly retrofits. A big portion of home care costs involve retrofits for wheelchairs and walkers. Why? For those 16 plus, county had in 1997 nearly 7,000 residents could not use stairs and 15,000 who had difficulty using stairs. Yet most new housing has stairs. Building a visitable home costs $150 to $300 if it's designed in before construction. Fixing it later costs thousands. For Oregon families to care for its members, good jobs are critical. 118,000 jobs needed to return to pre-recession employment levels. New jobs are paying far less than previous jobs. 38% of Oregonians with disabilities worked full-time in 1999. 58% had some type of employment that year. The average Oregon family contributed nearly 2 times more for health insurance between 1993 and 2001. Recent studies show that tax cut and business tax incentives have not or do not stimulate economic activity or create jobs. Reduced public services causes more loss than gain, economic slowdown, and diminishes key public infrastructure needed for business. New legislative strategies on state revenue are necessary. Families need good-paying jobs so they can take care of elderly and disabled family members. Fulfill our promise. Do our duty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So building a community that supports our economy really does require public investments, as we know. A successful business needs good roads, educated workers, and a safe and stable community with good housing and a healthy environment. We'll pose the next questions to the candidates from House District 30, all of whom are with us this morning. First, Representative Kitts. What is the connection between the type of housing constructed today and the ability to remain at home independently in the future? What legislative solutions are there to prepare for this aging community? Your 1-minute response, please.
Great, thank you. In the legislature, we recently passed, not recently, last session, passed just simply this fact that would allow for the elderly to stay in their homes longer and putting in place requirements for new home construction. Again, I'd like to see how those are being implemented. I'd like to see back from those people that are directly affected by those things to find out if they work before we continue to chase this problem time and time. We got to let we got to let the solutions catch up with the problems before we see if they're working or not. Things like Project Oregon Independence, I think, are very important and vital to that question. And again, that's why the 3 of us that served in the legislature stood firm. Even when the governor and the leadership of the Senate, the Democrats, wanted to cut Oregon Project Independence and get out of the building, we said no, we'll stay here till December. We'll say it again next session.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Semrau, recent national studies reveal that tax cuts have not created more jobs in Oregon. Oregon needs 118,000 jobs to return to our pre-recession job levels. What proposals might you have to boost the economy in our state?
I was hoping I could talk about the infrastructure needs being in construction, but that's fine. Yeah, jobs are a huge issue. I think one problem we have is jobs are going overseas. I work at Intel for another week, it looks like, and I know a computer engineer who's our janitor right now in a trailer, and he says there's more job listings on Intel's website for India than there are for the United States. So one thing is we need to start, the state laws need to start reining in corporations and start limiting corporations to a limited scope, how they used to be mandated, and to fulfill society's needs, not to be corporate monsters and capitalist giants. So the states need to work with the federal government to start reining in corporations and keeping jobs in America and giving us fair competition, which isn't too much to ask. And the states also need to start working together and working with Congress to reform our banking system. Right now, we give the federal government all of our power for all the programs they want, and all they do is they print monopoly money, which increases in inflation. So the value of our dollar is debased. Inflation increases because we have a printing press that just continues to print money without any backing. So monetary reform is key to everything.
Thank you. Mr. Sander, what connection do you see between a sound local economy and such public infrastructures as good schools, good roads, libraries, access to health care? And what legislative solutions would you put forward?
Well, it's a good question, and I think the current legislature has gone about this a little bit backwards, and the common theory seems to be we're going to cut taxes to try and lure businesses here. And what we've done is cut taxes to the point that we've crippled the education system, the health system, and we can no longer afford to fund all the public services that are necessary. Now, Intel could have built their plants in Montana or Utah or anywhere else, but they came to Oregon because people love Oregon. The people here, the community here, the good schools, good economy, and I think if you start with education and things of that nature and build up your public services and fund those, businesses will come. They'll want to settle here. It's a beautiful place to be. So I think you need to focus more on your economy and your education and things like that, and I think the businesses will follow.
Okay. Now I'd invite other candidates for their 30-second response. Mr. Cox.
Well, one of the questions posed had to do with tax cuts and job creation. And unfortunately, here in Oregon, we didn't experience the tax cuts that other states experienced, in part because my opponent, Mary Gallegos, voted to disconnect us from the federal tax cut linkage, which meant that the benefits of that tax cut in boosting the economy went disproportionately to other states and bypassed us. She also voted over 40 times to raise taxes and fees. So I think we need to give tax cuts a chance. We need to do what John F. Kennedy said and take advantage of the fact that a lower tax rate will bring higher tax revenue.
Okay. Other response? Yes, Mr. Olson.
Thank you. I'll make just a quick comment. As I've said throughout my campaign, nothing happens in America and in Oregon until money changes hands. I'd like for people to think about that. Nothing happens until money changes hands. That means we need to be business friendly, we need to have jobs, we need to remove some of the restrictions that we have to make the businesses we have stay here and others come. And secondly, on the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we've touched on that in one form or another, sometime back I taught a number of classes on that, some right here in this building, and I think that also needs to be a part of our building codes as it is in some respects, and maybe even more so that when new homes, new buildings are made, it even goes to a lower level than it does now, fewer restrictions.
Okay. Representative Gallegos.
It's an important partnership between the legislature and our business community. This legislature, this last session, we passed the single sales factor. This was an important incentive for our local businesses, the big high-tech economy that's located here. They wanted that, they needed it, and we're seeing the response from it. They've recently relocated a variety of different organizations up here to Oregon, bringing their employees here. They're buying homes, they're investing in our community, and they're going to be sending our children to school. It's an important commitment that we have from many of these high-tech companies that they're going to come, they want to stay, they want us to invest, and they'll invest as well. It's a great partnership.
Representative Crummell.
Thank you. I would just like to touch on the housing that is being constructed today. Mr. Roloff mentioned visitability, and I would like to point out that in 2003 I co-sponsored a bill with Senator Vicki Walker from Eugene, and we passed the bill in both chambers, and it was signed by the governor, that gives incentives to home builders to build housing with visitability in mind, so that when people that have physical disabilities want to come and visit somebody, they are able to get in the door, they're able to use the toilet facilities and that sort of thing. The other thing is, with regards to that, is project independence. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Sander.
Some people have raised the point that we need to even maybe lower business taxes more and make it more friendly to businesses. And I would just point out that Oregon has the lowest business tax rate in the 11 western states, and that we only collect 42 cents on the dollar of taxes in general here due to 350 tax breaks that we have right now. So I don't think it's working. I think we need to look at other things. And when you have a community like Hillsborough that had the shortest school year in the nation, I can't blame businesses if they don't want to relocate their employees here.
Representative.
I think Mick brings up a great point with these tax loopholes that he talks about and these tax breaks and tax incentives. 80% of what he speaks of is the mortgage interest deduction. I would question whether or not he wants to touch that with, everybody that's trying to get into a home these days, which is the big incentive to get into a home. So I personally wouldn't. If he would, that's fine. I would also like to point out that the density requirements in our state that are imposed by Metro require us to put a specific number of homes on a specific, based on the acre, and we're not able to do that at 4,500 and 5,000 square foot lots. It's not able to get built up and not out, and these are some of the problems that we as the legislature face, and it's not a legislative solution that you're looking for. It's a Metro solution.
Yeah. One quick comment on the federal tax cuts at least is it's a complete deception, because as long as our federal debt increases faster than our per capita or GDP increases every year, our federal debt burden increases, our tax burden increases. So President Bush gave us tax cuts, but he increased our tax burden. I mean, just look at the financials. The debt is bigger per capita. That means at least your future generations are going to owe more taxes. So those tax cuts are completely deceptive. The tax burden has been increased greatly the last 4 years in the federal government on Americans. Look at the numbers. They don't make sense.
Yes, Mr. Riley.
I think the key here is not more taxes, but more jobs. We need to create more jobs in our state. We need to help small businesses in any way we can to be able to start up and stay in Oregon and employ more people. I think that's the key.
All right, well, we've run through our 4 issues. You have all given very thoughtful answers. You now recognize, I think, the concerns that we have around issues of veterans and persons with disability and the aged. What will be required of you who get elected to the legislature for next year certainly will be attention to programs that are creative, programs that are efficient, programs that reflect the compassion that you talked about in the beginning when you talked about personal relationships with people you know who are either veterans or disabled or elderly. The advisory councils and the citizens of Washington County want to thank you for your interest and your participation in the 2004 Legislative Candidates Forum. I'd like to offer each of you the opportunity to share with the voters how you will help your elder constituents, your constituents with disabilities, and your constituents who served our country and their families. In this case, we give you a full 2 minutes to talk about it. If elected to the legislature, what specifically would you do to build a better Oregon for our elders, our veterans, and our people with disability? Again, I think I'll just start from the left and move along the table. Representative Kitts.
Thank you, and thank you once again for having this wonderful forum with very thoughtful questions presented to the candidates that seek that very office. I would tell you that as your current state representative, I will continue the work that I have done in Salem. I will continue the fight that I have fought in Salem on behalf of veterans in receiving the Oregon Veterans Association endorsement. I will continue the fight for the elderly that are increasing in age, that are having to choose whether or not to go into homes or whether or not to stay at home and how they can stay at home, through continuing to fight for Oregon Project independence as I have done in my first session. And if that means staring down the governor and staring down leadership of either party, I know that myself and the 2 other candidates that have served with me in the legislature, I'll do it again, and I have no problem with doing that. As far as roads and infrastructure go, we passed the single largest roads and infrastructure bill this state has ever seen. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we're addressing those problems. And as far as libraries go, which is one of the questions that I didn't have a chance to answer, I'm proud to say that I'm working with Hillsboro's Mayor Tom Hughes in supporting Hillsboro's library, not the Washington County Library, but Hillsboro's library, because I believe that our community takes care of our library and our kids. I think it's important, so I'm supporting that. I'm helping him run the campaign. These are some of the issues that are going to be facing the next legislative session, and these are issues that people have to have solid solutions for and not simple campaign rhetoric. So in saying that, I see my time is running down. I've served 1 term. I'd like to serve another term, and I'd appreciate your support. Thank you.
Mr. Samrow.
I gotta tell you my priorities. Public infrastructure is #1. I am a civil engineer, been a structural engineer, been in construction. My uncle's been a public works director for Vancouver. #1 priority for me. Second priority is helping the needy and the poor. To use a religious example from the Bible, the farmers in Israel are supposed to use their surplus crops to help the needy, the poor, include the disabled, people who need help. To me, that's the second most important priority, is to help those who can't help themselves. On that note, I think we face some problems that we need to start talking out of the box to solve them. And a lot of them are on the national level. And the states I'm a big proponent of states' rights. Our Constitution has been trampled. The rule of law no longer holds in this country. One big issue as far as costs go, our biggest political economy issue today is our banking system. What happens is, instead of the federal government taxing you, doing as a pay-as-we-go for all these projects they propose, you know, I mean, we can promise you more programs and more money, but ultimately it's your money we're spending, right? So the federal government Instead of increasing the taxes, they just print more money, raise the debt limit every year, and so you don't get charged taxes for it, but your money is debased. As more money is in the money supply, the value of each dollar goes down, therefore costs go up. So that's the true cause of inflation, is our money supply. It's fraudulent. Our Federal Reserve is a private banking cartel. It's owned by private individuals, and there's no reserves to cover your money. And that is a key issue for everything I talk about. The other issue is, as far as the state level, we have a lot of money in the state. Our general fund only talks about 1/3 of the money that we have in the government. We have over $10 billion in cash and investments. I've read the 2003 Comprehensive Financial Report for the state. We're using shady accounting practices right now, which don't reveal all the money that the state of Oregon actually has to use. So I would propose legislation to open up the comprehensive financials, use the budget using the comprehensive financials, and allow transfers of money from different funds to support things like the disabled and the veterans. We need to start talking out of the box and talking about reality.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sander.
Yes, well, there's been quite a lot of legislative back-patting on the panel here, I think, among some of the legislators that are currently here, and I just would like to remind some of the folks out there that the last session in the current legislature is the legislature that left the Oregon schools with, at least the Hillsborough schools, the shortest school year in the nation, left the Oregon Health Plan without funding, freezing new enrollments, and cutting benefits to almost 75,000 people. So I do find some of the things that are said, hard to swallow with respect to where the money is going for the Oregon Health Plan. On a personal level, Mr. Kitts asked me to address the interest that you pay for your house as far as tax deduction. And that's not something that I've mentioned and not something that I have even talked about. The tax cuts that I'm referring to are pleasure boats, for example. Tax cuts for owning pleasure boats account for about $30 million. And the corporate minimum tax of $10 in this state, which is ridiculously low. So if you raise the minimum tax a little bit there, you could come up with close to $70 million. And those are the tax cuts that I'm looking at. Unlike Mr. Kitts, I actually do own and live in a house in District 30. And I understand what homeowners go through. And, I pay my principal and interest every month just like everybody else. So I understand what that goes through. And I've got kids in our schools. And I think we need to pay a lot of attention to not only where the money goes, but we need to still fully fund these programs. The Oregon Health Plan, our education system are badly in disrepair. And I think we need to give them fully funding while managing the spending that's going on as well.
Thank you very much. Representative Crummell.
Thank you. And again, I would like to thank you all for volunteering to do this and for putting this forum on. My legislative priorities for next session are to make sure that we get a health savings account legislation for Oregon Health Plan put into place. And then concurrently to work with the congressional delegation to increase the reimbursements for our providers to draw them back into the system and get their reimbursements to them quicker. It is no secret that we also need better accountability in our government budgeting. I think that the state budgeting system has been broken for quite some time, and I have worked over the course of the last 3 sessions and will continue to work to bring that accountability into focus. We need to get the money to where it belongs, working for the people of the state of Oregon, not feeding a bureaucracy in Salem. Again, I will advocate for help to families with developmentally disabled and with elderly family members where they need the help, whether it be through time off, someone that can come in and help them in that respect, or whether it's for some type of cash assistance or help with navigating the medical system. But I think that we've got to help these folks who unfortunately have had family members either born or develop different types of disabilities. We need to eliminate programs that are not working and not meeting the state's overall mission, and then redirect those dollars into areas such as mental health services, such as elderly care services, so that we can improve on those areas, including Oregon Project Independence. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Olson.
I too would like to thank this group for the opportunity to appear before you and bring forward some of my qualifications as well as my thoughts. I think this is really how government is supposed to work, so thank you very much. With respect to the topic of the day, I think first of all I'll go back and say what I said before. There's a moral component to government, and we must realize that it's not all about roads, it's not all about public safety, it's about human beings, and that's part of what we do. Having said that, there is a larger picture. What I would do specifically for the subject we've talked about today, our disabled, our elders, I first would like to call attention to it and see some sort of education at a higher level than currently exists so people understand it. You heard from all of us today that each of us has a situation where there are people suffering from one situation or another. Second of all, I'd like to fund more veteran services officers. I think they're the key to taking the veterans' benefits into the community one-on-one. Third, I'd like to see some improvements to transportation, particularly in our small towns. It's hard for people to get around. On the Oregon coast, we have very limited bus service, much less than in the metropolitan area. And with respect to my own qualifications and why I would like you to vote for me, it's been about 34 years since I graduated from college. Half of that time has been in local government and schools, the other half in private business. And the last 12 years in private business with my own. And when you do that, you become very pragmatic. You become very real about the money you have in the bank and what you can spend. Unfortunately, the state of Oregon does not have all the money that it would like, and something will have to give. My priorities are education, public safety, health and human services. The remainder after that as funds allow. A good legislator, in my judgment, knows his state, he knows his district. And in my case, I have the education, the experience, the temperament, and the support of the majority, and I believe that's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Representative Davis.
Yes, it's been an honor to serve this last session. It was a long one and it was a tough one. There were a lot of tough choices that we had to make. None of them were easy. But we didn't just end the work once the session was over. I've been hard at work during the interim as co-chair of the Joint Information Technology Committee, digging in and looking for efficiencies, how we can eliminate many of the redundancies and shared services that are in this state, and targeted, literally targeted, just 2 weeks ago, $300 million in savings, that we can take that savings and put it to better use, such as in services. We can restore some funding. It's a model that we're creating in this committee to where we can take that model and use it in other agencies, other programs, so we can extract the savings, extract the efficiencies without sacrificing the services. I'm already working on legislation for the Veterans Pilot Project, Part 2, having that drafted, working with the Department of Veterans here in the county to draft some significant legislation to help us fund our veterans and programs and the county veteran service officers statewide. We have a significant shortage statewide, so we can start reaping some of the benefits of those federal programs that we have been lacking in, and which will allow us to free up many Medicaid dollars, which can be better spent on other folks. Working on some human trafficking issues that are going to affect abuse, the abuse of women, children, seniors who are caught in the trap of trafficking and abuse, and working on a federal task force that will be announced here in the next 2 weeks. I'm excited about the work that we're doing here during the interim. We haven't stopped. We're looking for these efficiencies, and we're getting the work done now so that we can use and utilize these dollars to help us fund these programs come January. $300 million is a lot, and we need to make every last penny go into services instead of taking it from out of services and making people suffer. Thank you.
Mr. Cox.
I can't tell you how glad I am to have this opportunity to be here and see you and talk to you, and I want you to know that I'm going to come down here as often as you want me down here and work with all of you. I was recently down in Salem with the Oregon Progress Board, which is the group that's responsible for keeping track of how well or how poorly we're serving our aged, our disabled, our veterans, and every other part of state government. And when I was down there, they had very kind words for Representative Crummell, who is championing, as I understand it from them, improved training for legislators on how to better manage our state using real numbers and real outcomes, not using spending as a proxy for caring, but actually looking at what that spending results in. We can spend more and get less, and we've been doing it. We're the sixth highest spending state in the country. And yet, how many of us feel the benefits of that spending? We don't. And we've had some real mistakes made in the last legislature. My opponent, Mary Gallegos, voted to raise taxes on people with fixed incomes. That doesn't help you. What we need is a legislature that follows the governor's model of prioritization and judging every program by how well it delivers real results for real people. I talked earlier about my force multiplier program for the 57 inspectors. When I suggested something similar to that for veterans 2 years ago, I was criticized by a veterans lobbyist because my plan would have done more with less money. And you see, that meant we would spend less, and that was bad. So he wasn't even noticing that we were going to get more done. He just noticed that the spending might go down, and that was inherently evil, and he didn't want to hear the details of the program. And that is a toxic mindset. We've got to rise above that and really look at how these programs affect real human beings in our communities.
Thank you. Mr. Riley.
14 years ago, we had an education system in this state that was the best, one of the best in the country. And now in this district, we've cut 17 days, and we know about that because we read it in the cartoons. Oregon was revolutionary in creating the Oregon Health Plan, but in the last 14 years, it's been gutted and mismanaged by the legislature. It's time for a change. There are things that need to get done in this state. We have to get our economy back on track. We've got to get Oregonians working again. For 10 years, I was a small business owner, and I know how hard it is to get a business up and running, and even harder to keep it going. We have to have those businesses in this state to create the jobs that create the revenue that run our programs. I'll make it easier for small businesses to start up and stay in business in Oregon by reducing paperwork. I'll work to promote good economic development that creates jobs and keeps jobs in our state and not overseas. I want to make sure health care is affordable and available to all Oregonians. I work to lower costs by supporting bills that require public hearings and insurance commissioner approval before big insurance companies raise their rates. I make sure that we can bargain with drug companies for lower prices for our seniors and our veterans and our disabled citizens. Currently, the new plan that the President has put out has given us a great drug card which almost no one can take advantage of. I want to make sure that we are able to actually lower our costs for prescription drugs. And if that means going to Canada to get them, so be it. Whatever the cost, I find it absolutely disgraceful that some people have to decide between feeding their families and buying the prescription drugs. I see that my time's up. Thank you very much.
Well, we've come to the conclusion of this 2004 Candidates Forum, and I think that we've certainly met the expectations and the hopes of the advisory committee. Our ambitions in this Candidates Forum was to first raise your awareness about the issues that we think are significant for our populations of concern. We were able to learn more about your own experience with these populations, with veterans, with persons with disabilities, and with the elderly. And we've certainly had the opportunity to see how you think about solutions to some of the critical issues that are going to be facing us in the next legislature. So once again, I would like to thank you on behalf of the advisory committees who organized this event for your participation this morning, for your thoughtful remarks, and for your willingness to serve as we're meeting some very challenging times in our state. Thank you very much.